What's going on, y'all? My name is Shellz. You can call me Shellz, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Content here at AOE Esports. Just recently, I was given the absolute pleasure to have a conversation with the King of Amateur, a man who needs no introduction, a player whose reputation for dominance absolutely precedes him from his time on ASIO to his time on Anu, where he won back-to-back Scouting Ground championships, to his time on Evil Geniuses Academy, where he boasted a 8-4 record there, to his time most recently on No Org, where his team dropped a total of 2 games in 3 best of 3s and 3 best of 5s. I'll let you do the math on that one. I'm, of course, speaking of the one, the only, the GOAT of Amateur, Fire. Hope you enjoy. You've been in the scene for a very long time. You've been a consistent winner. Not just a consistently good player in the game. There's been good players, but you play well and you win. And you took this past split off after a very strong run of dominance, after not being able to find yourself on an academy or an LCS roster. So just give me a quick rundown of whether or not you've been keeping up with the Proving Grounds scene in this summer split, and I guess some similarities or differences that were kind of stark and noticeable to you between this split and then your last split.
Yeah, so I kept up here and there, obviously not being directly involved. I wasn't like completely in tune with it, right? I wasn't having dreams about the amateur scene like I was during spring. But yeah, no, I mean, I kept up with some of the things going on. There was a few big differences. Obviously, academy teams did perform a lot well in summer. I do think a big part of that came down to the fact that academy teams just played so many more games in summer, right? In spring, they were a bit stunted with their regular season ending so early and not having playoffs. So I think they did a really good job of bouncing back. But I also think amateur teams, amateur teams still showed up. Lots of people were saying like, "Oh, amateur is so much weaker. There's no org, there's no solo fide." But there was a bunch of teams who ended up, coming through, smurfing it. So like definitely top end of amateur could still be happy, I think, even though academy did improve.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We saw teams like Wildcard Red just absolutely bulldoze through the whole Proving Grounds circuit in the summer, but we also saw teams like Resolve and Zeus take games off of academy teams. There were a lot of very good performances from these amateur teams here. Of the players you did see, were there any surprises specifically? Any mids you thought might be able to rival your performances in the mid lane, or maybe even guys who've proven themselves to be actually LCS ready from any of these amateur teams?
Yeah, so actually I wanna deflect a bit. First, I do want to give a shout out to Chad and Gamsu coming. They came in from amateur, right? They were originally amateur players. Sure, they were playing on 100 Thieves Academy, but they came in from amateur and they smurfed it. Everyone was worried like, 100 Thieves Academy has 2 amateur players. They looked really, really good, but how far can they make it? And then they made it all the way, right? So that was super impressive from them. In terms of mid laners, shout outs to, the amateur staples, people like APA, Dark Wings, who have been around for a little while now, who were still able to show up, still show that, they can test for these top spots. And they have a lot to prove out there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play against them this split, so it's a bit hard for me to tell exactly, who's really LCS ready. I definitely think almost all of, if not all of the amateur players who made it to PG are at least academy ready, though. I'm hoping that teams are giving them a strong, hard look this offseason. I hope they've got their VODs ready to showcase to all the teams. Hope, they get some tryouts, they get some chances, because, I think there's so many players in amateur who deserve a shot, and they just need to be given a chance and an opportunity to shine.
That's a very good point and a great segue into my next question. I know you mentioned to Tim Sevenhuysen in your interview with him, you were talking about the importance of the offseason. And there were 2 things you said. One was during the offseason, it's very important to try and get to your peak LP, just grind solo queue and try to get as high as you can, get noticed, your name is up there in the leaderboards. But you also mentioned the Inhouses, that Anero was very pivotal in introducing to the scene and there was a lot of games going on, it was basically all the time. You were having high elite tier competition with comms against players who were very serious. You know how solo queue is borderline a completely different game than
Yep.
actual organized play. So, what would you say would probably be the more impactful of the two? What would boost a player's visibility to these academy teams or even LCS teams? High rank in solo queue or being seen in some high level in-houses?
Ooh, that's a tough one because obviously both are super helpful, super useful. I think I would have to say if you can achieve it, because it is difficult. If you can get, rank two, rank three, rank one, even on solo queue, I think it's a really big deal. I think people really love, seeing like, oh my, this guy was rank one, right? Like this guy he was, oh my gosh, he's this much LP rank one, right? Um, but there's some nuance there, right? For example, this season, rank one isn't going to mean as much because lots of people are going to EU. I
Exactly.
know like 15 people who are in EU, and that's not counting the pro players who all went to EU, right? Um, but so if solo queue isn't maybe viewed as important, then that is where the in-houses can come in super clutch. And the in-houses can also be really clutch because they provide you with some invaluable resources. I was talking about those VODs earlier. That's where you can get some really recent up-to-date VODs, which, even if a team isn't participating in those in-houses, even if their coaches aren't watching at the time, you will have these VODs of your play, like you said, in these elite settings in competitive that you can showcase to anyone and everyone who wants it, which can be a really big deal. And then if you are lucky enough that a team who's interested is watching the in-houses, then you can even get direct feedback from them right then and there, which is a huge help going into the off season because, a lot of the times as a fresh player with not very many connections, it can be tough to know what's going on going into the off season. So having someone that you have, having a coach or a manager that you've already made a connection with can be a big deal.
Yeah, and I think you've mentioned that before as well. Just the ability and the skill it takes to network within the scene, because being a very strong player is good, but we've seen in just about every walk of life, it's not always about how strong you are. It's about networking. It's about visibility. I think. Do you believe that a player in the amateur scene has to work harder to make themselves be seen and be known to these guys? And does it take more than just in houses or just looking for team posts to be uh, a kind of legitimate, let's call it a prospect for some of these higher level teams?
Yeah, so well, I mean, it's going to end up being different for every single person. I would definitely say in past years, it was incredibly difficult for amateur players to get their name out there because, there weren't very many big leagues, and even the big leagues weren't watched that much by pro scouts. Definitely with Proving Grounds this year, it has improved a ton, right? The fact that, like, in spring, for example, I was able to play on a team, play against a bunch of academy teams, get practice against a bunch of academy teams in scrims, things like that. It was a really big deal. That definitely like closed the gap a little bit. But definitely as an amateur player, one thing I like to say is you don't have an off season, right? Right now, there's a lot of pro players who are going home. I see them talking about like, oh, I'm playing this new MMO. What's some good games to play? What's some good
Uh-huh.
shows to watch? But as an amateur player, I'm like, I just, I would have just gotten done with my season, right, if I hadn't taken a split off. And now I'm going straight into tryouts, I'm going straight into in-houses. I'm going straight into grinding solo queue for the end of the season, right? If going straight into scouting grounds, if you're able to qualify for that, right? So truly as an amateur, you have to work hard. And like you said, you have to work hard without some of those resources, you have to be able to find everything by yourself, do everything by yourself. Obviously, there's lots of great teams, great amateur teams out there now that can help you with that sort of stuff. But as an amateur player, I'll say it's definitely a lot of work. I definitely think some people, think it's like, oh, you're just some kid in high school playing a video game, but like there's legitimate stuff that goes into it. Like you said, the connections, the grinding, all of it. You have to work pretty much all the time, no breaks. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, look, the grind just really does not stop, and keeping in the tone of resources and whatnot. Obviously, the academy teams, one, have more money, two, have a higher tier of coaches and more staff and whatnot. But are there things that the amateur scene could do? That are there things that they could bring more to the table for these players that wouldn't break the bank, or that could maybe not replicate, but bring themselves closer to the level of what academy teams are doing, or is that about impossible? Like, you've been on both sides. You've been in the amateur
Yeah.
scene. You've been on academy. Is there a way to bridge the gap without breaking the bank, or is that just like a plain budget kind of thing?
I don't think it's possible to completely close the gap.
Mm-hmm.
I think, there will just always be a difference because I'm pretty sure basically all the academy teams are running at a super hard loss, right? I don't think anyone's really making a ton of money off of academy. So it's
Probably
tough to
not.
tell people in amateur. It's tough to tell people in amateur, lots of us are kids in high school or kids in college, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who have very little disposable income. But there are ways to do things that don't require a ton of money, right? Like for players, like we've talked so much about visibility and how it's a resource, how it's super important connections. Teams can help those players to build connections, right? They can help those players to reach out. They can help those players to create content. They can create content with and for those players as well. They can do their best to give them a social media presence, even if the player maybe isn't as comfortable in social media themselves. And that can all be super helpful and super invaluable. And it's something that I hope more amateur teams get into, especially the LCS amateur teams. I would love to see them like do actual videos and like do big promotions with their amateur players because, well, maybe they aren't making very much money off them and they're pretty unknown and, maybe they're not as good or as hype as their LCS squad. They're
Yeah.
still going to be super important. I mean, we've already seen with EG and Danny, how what a massive success he was. I'm excited to see what EG
Skyrocket.
does next. And I hope that, people will hype up these amateur players so that way when they jump into the LCS scene, the hype is already there, it's already built, and we can be excited to see what comes next.
You are walking me straight into these questions. I promise you, we did not go over these questions beforehand. But the next thing I want to talk about was content. And there aren't very many teams doing it. I mean, the amateur scene, there's literally only one team doing it. In the academy scene, you really don't see much of anything going on highlighting these players that are here. These are very good players. There are some players in the academy scene who will be in the LCS in spring. And there's definitely been players kind of like let's just say Arrow in the amateur scene. Look, there is a huge way to market him and to get content out about him. Just his name alone is a great way to bring visibility not only to himself, his teammates, but the amateur scene as a whole. And you made a very fair point about you didn't quite use the word responsibility, but I would use that word. I would say there is a slight responsibility, whether it's from the players, whether it's from the teams, or from the scene as a whole, to understand the importance of content, the importance of visibility, the importance of marketability for some of these players. I know you mentioned it. It can sometimes be, like you said, a challenge to get some of these players to, come out of their comfort zone, do content, get on the camera, maybe play a character a little bit, or,
Yeah.
be in a video. Do you believe that there is in some form or fashion, some responsibility on the players, the team, or maybe even some of these, I guess you could call them the faces of the scene, meaning these guys who are easily recognizable, like some of these casters, maybe the TOs, to invest in content, even though it may run at a loss. But in the long run, do you think that content can help push the amateur scene forward as a whole?
Yeah, so and actually I do just want to give a shout out. You mentioned casters in there. I do think the casters and amateur have been killing it, especially this past year,
Oh yeah, oh
in
yeah.
in the content department. I see their posts on Twitter all the time. Half the time I have no clue what's going on. Like they've made some crazy bet for the game today, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll watch today because this guy's gonna shave his head if they don't win or something, or this guy's gonna eat a shoe, right?
Yeah.
Um, just fun little silly stuff like that. And I think you use the word responsibility, but I do think another big part of it is we are all in amateur, right? We're not technically professionals. We're all trying to get there,
Hmm.
but we're all here because we share a common passion and a common love for the game and for the esport, right? And I think that's really where content should try to come from. Content should just try to be fun, try to express the passion and the drive that we have for this esports scene. And I think if people approach it that way, I think a lot more people would be, interested in content, would be down to do it. Definitely, though, if you're a player and you're goal is to go pro, it is definitely part of your responsibility to understand that a part of the job is business. You know, there are some players who definitely were kept around for a long time because they were popular. Maybe there was a better option, but they were a player who brought in money. You know, at the end of the day, that is something that is very important that these teams will look at. I know teams in the past have talked to me about my social media presence. You know, do I stream? Would I be open to streaming more? You know, there were video appearances in my EG Academy contract, even though we didn't end up using them, right?
Hmm.
So they are definitely a very important part of the scene. And while I wouldn't say it's your responsibility to like, oh, you have to go stream every single day before and after scrims, like you definitely at least need to understand that it's something that's very important and that at some point someone's going to ask you to get in front of a camera and it'll probably be for the best interest of your career to do so. So yeah, I 100% agree that the understanding needs to be there.
I know for me, I don't know how many times you were, in the LCS stream when PG was going on, but numerous times, almost I think every time they streamed, there was someone who'd come in and say, "What is this?"
Yeah.
And that is I think the biggest problem right there. I think bridging the gap between amateur and academy being question marks in people's eyes. People who follow the LCS, I mean, they know there's levels of play underneath the LCS. It's about, I think, reaching them in some way or another. And the streams themselves are already visible, but they don't have, I guess, any sort of investment into those teams, those players, those narratives. And I think content is a great way to connect people and to cast a wider net, so that it's an infinite feedback loop. You give content for the players. They draw in more attention. The players themselves get more visibility. They have a higher profile. It helps them market themselves to teams, and the scene grows more and more to the point where maybe the LCS Twitter account actually promotes Proving Grounds when it's going on, but. That was a slight joke, but kind of serious actually. But just moving forward and talking about specifically some of these in-houses that are going on, Area of Effect Esports is starting this Monday at 7 p.m. Going to start having show matches for the in-house system that they've implemented over the past couple of days, and it's not just going to be about in-houses. Like there's obviously going to be show matches with players coming in and playing, but there's also going to be content that is made surrounding that as well. Is there a way to legitimize in-house content, or should it just be centric on, like, separate it from that altogether and be more about the players themselves, and let the in-houses be just about coaches and staff and VODs and hearing comms and whatnot?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a place for both. Because there's a lot of players and a lot of staff, and a lot of casters, and a lot of organizers who, not all of us can go to Europe, right? Not all of us can go participate in the whole world's scene, for the whole month it's going on. Um, I would say definitely part of it does need to be kept somewhat separate. In-houses can be really important for certain players and for coaches, right? So, definitely all the baseline stuff needs to be there. Need to make sure that you've got some competitive matches with some good players, give easy access to these coaches, to these managers, right? To be able to, do their jobs. But on top of that, like I said, there's a bunch of casters, there's a bunch of organizers who don't have anything to do. And if they want to, help create content, if they want to, help run things, if they want to make the system work better as a whole, right, holistically, then I think that's great, and I just wanted to ping back to what you said earlier about, there's people who will come into these chats and, type some question marks. And I think one of the best things is if you have content, when they type question marks, you can just, and they say, well, what is this? You can be like, this is what this is. Here's a video talking about these players. Here's a video talking about these matchups. Here's a graphic describing why this game is so important, right? Like here's a quick little introduction to the amateur scene as a whole, So I think like stuff like that can be super helpful, can be super important. In-houses, it's a bit delicate because, there is a serious professional aspect to them, right? These players are trying their best to get scouted. They're trying their best to get on pro teams, and the scouts, that's their job. They're trying to scout players. But it's like if you've got like a designer and on one hand and an artist on the other, just because the designer has to be doing something and the artist has nothing to do doesn't mean the artist can't help out, right? So
Exactly. That's a great point. And just as a final question for you, I don't want to keep you for too long. I just want to get your thoughts on how have in-houses and even this time you're taking off to create content. I know the streams kind of going crazy. Just give me your thoughts on your personal experience with in-houses before and taking the split off for content and I guess growing your brand personally.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start with in-houses. I mean, they do a great number of things. I mean, I initially did in-houses way back in winter of 2018. I think was the first time I did in-houses, or maybe it was winter of 2019. But either way, like, I mean, they did so many things. It gave me a ton of confidence, right? I remember I played one in-house set against Pobelter, right? And I like performed. I didn't perform that great. I was pretty bad back then. He's still pretty good. But, I had a couple good games against him, and that gave me a ton of confidence moving forward, and again gave me some VODs that I had to show to teams. I could be like, look, I played against Pobelter and like I did okay, right? And that can show teams a future, right? That I have potential, and all that great stuff. I mean, they're also just fun, right? The end of season can be a bit of a coin flip. A lot of times, you've got lots of random stuff going on, people getting boosted at the end of the season,
Uh-huh.
like people just trolling, like because their rank is secured, all this random stuff. It can be a bit of a mess. So in-houses are a nice place where you can, sit down and actually have some good quality games, some good quality practice. Especially like I said, if you're not able to go boot camp or you don't have the money or resources for something like that. So that's obviously super helpful. Um, and yeah, I mean, overall, and then obviously the connections that you build, right? The people you get to talk to, you get in a call and you're with an LCS player. I mean, you get to chat with them, get to talk, get to hang out, and obviously they'll teach you a lot at the same time, which is really a big deal. Then jumping more over to the content side, I mean, content is the content I was doing is a very different space. Like I was fully focused on it, not all in competitive so much. But it taught me a lot more stuff too. It again gave me a lot more self-confidence because it's something I think a lot of players don't realize, but like there's literally thousands of people who want to hear what you have to say. Like as a challenger player, literally there's so many people who they want to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. They want to talk to you. They think you're cool, right? And that was something I think I hadn't really realized for a long time because I just surrounded myself with other pro players, right? So I was always like, oh, I'm not that good.
Hard to
But
know your influence when you're playing
yeah,
alongside some great
exactly,
players. Yeah.
exactly. And then it also allowed me to meet, like a ton of great people. I got to play with some other amateur players in some, fun tournaments. So players like Alorem, RBM, Zazel.
Uh-huh.
And then, I got to make some connections that, I never thought I'd be able to make. I got to play with Vienna, who works for C9. She's a VTuber now,
Yeah.
and like that was really fun. That was really crazy. Getting to play with Tarzane, which love him or hate him, definitely a super interesting experience. And making some money off that. I got to play in the show match against like Double Lift, High, Sneaky, Meteos, all these
I saw
legendary
that. Yeah.
players,
Yeah.
right? Like these were opportunities I never would have had if I wasn't, open to pursuing content, right? And open to playing these tournaments that, are still somewhat competitive, but, are also have this fun aspect to them, right? Like, I had to get my ass kicked in Valorant, goes whatever it was, like 0-13 every game. Sometimes, that's a part of the content too, but I got to meet all these great people. And, for example, I'm going to be out in LA next week. I don't know. Well, I don't know when this interview will release, but I'm going to be out in LA and there's a bunch of people who are like, yo, do you want to hang out? Like, you want to like grab some food? And, from there, who knows what could happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if someone has an opportunity or if someone has something they want to do, like I'll be on their list of people to call up. And so, it just keeps my options like infinitely open, right? And everyone in the scene, has a love for the game. We all have this common connection. We all have this common ground. So, like these huge content creators, might seem like these really distant people that are, like doing this whole different thing, but really it's not too crazy. I mean, we've seen lots of players have successful transitions from pro to content, obviously Doublift, Sneaky, Meteos, but even smaller people like Bobkin, have made that transition. So content like definitely teaches you a lot of different things. It's not quite the same as competitive, but it's also not too different either.
Yeah, not too different, and also still very important once you do reach that stage because, like you mentioned, there will most likely be things included in the contract where you have to appear in something or just give your thoughts on something. I've seen some of the C9 Worlds content so far. It's pretty funny. The detective skit they had was a pretty good one. But yeah, I 100% agree with you. Content, visibility, and I think showing yourself off as more than a player. There's the person behind the player as well, and I think connecting with the community is a huge way that to help not only yourself get to the spot you want to be at, but helps push the scene as a whole, and it'll help maybe bring down some of those questions about what is this when people pull up to the LCS stream when you're looking at 100 Thieves Academy and TL and they're second of their best of five with 100A coming out on top. But just want to give you a huge amount of appreciation, man. Thank you for taking time out of your day.
No problem.
Coming through here talking to me about your experiences, Proving Grounds scene, amateur scene, and what players can do to help potentially raise their stock moving into the spring split. Anything before you want to go? You want to go ahead and pitch? Anything you want to promote? Anything you want to just shout out? Anybody? Floor is yours.
Nah, I mean, just thanks to everyone who's continued to do so much to help and support the amateur scene. Like you said, I'm a bit of an old head here, so it's crazy to see, how far we've come in all this way. And I'm sure all the great people here will continue to keep pushing it forward. Even if I do make it on an academy team next year, which should happen, let's be honest. I'll still do my best to keep in tune with you guys and keep help pushing it forward. You guys are all the best.
No doubt, no doubt. Those are big words from, dare I say, the king of amateur. Any lies told there?
Dude, it's crazy that people just call me the king, Like,
You know what?
if it feels good that my hard work is recognized, what can I say?
Before we get off, I do want to mention that we talked about, personality, we talked about marketability, branding and whatnot. That's part of it. There's a lot of players who are kind of hesitant to, have a little banter going on to put themselves out there. I've seen you call yourself the king before. I've seen you, talk about the Silas being, you can't pick that into my Silas. Even if it's a bad matchup, my Silas versus what you got going on there probably won't be a good time for you. I think that's a very important thing as well. If it's not in your wheelhouse, I think players shouldn't force it. But I think you being so willing to have a personality and be kind of out there and be so confident, so openly is another huge factor to why, people still talk about you so often. You're always in the conversation, even after taking a split off. I don't know if you don't want to call yourself that. I'll call you you're the king of amateur, and it is what it is. You will. I'm putting it in the universe right now, man. You will be in Academy next split. Maybe real soon we'll see you, on the big stage, doing some really big things. But for right now, that's all we have time for. Thank you once again to Fire for coming through and showing some love and giving his thoughts on amateur scene, Inhouses content, all of that. I've been Shellz for AOE Esports, and until next time, good luck and have fun.